Welcome to yet another episode of Indigenization Appreciation Hour. Today we have a very special guest on board. Let me get to that without any further ado. Today we have with us Brigadier Karan Rathore, who's a veteran of the Indian Army's cavalry forces. He's from the Pune Horse, and among his many accomplishments, he also served as ADC to the legendary Lieutenant General Hanup Singh in the along the along what is now the line of actual control, presumably in Sikkim. So, so before we, and of course, with me is my associate, long-term associate, Sriram Tyagarajan, and I'm Saurav Jha. So let us now get down to the business end of things here, as far as our program is concerned. So today we are going to talk about, trends in sort of armored warfare, how armored warfare is set to evolve in given the learnings of recent conflicts, of which, of course, the Russia-Ukraine war is the most prominent. And we are going to sort of our discussion is going to proceed on those lines, and then we are going to look at our own, that is the Indian Army's future
We're going to look at
programs in the armored space and talk about the relevance and what they must look like and what the challenges would be going forward. And then we'll go a bit into the history of some of our own indigenous sort of programs related to armored platform development, to the development of armored fighting vehicles, as it were, AFVs. So I'll just give us a short preamble before we turn to Brigadier Rathore. So as you know that the one of the key principles of historically key principles of warfare, land-based warfare, has been the concentration of force. But that principle has been somewhat challenged in recent times, and there has been plenty of commentary which sort of suggests that more diffused, networked, and self-sufficient units, possibly sporting integrated arms and possibly being composed of manned and unmanned teams, is the way forward, right? Even in the Ukraine war, of course, in the Ukraine war, we've seen instances of the concentration of force being employed gainfully also. It's not like we haven't seen it. The most recent example would be the Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region of Russia in August last year, when they did manage to sort of when they did sort of manage the kind of classic maneuver warfare for penetration into in depth. But that was before this, or but that was in a situation where the Russians just were sort of blinded by electronic warfare from the Ukrainian side, and I dare say from the American side as well. So the Russian units, they could not really communicate with each other. I'm talking about the Russian artillery units that were defending that region, the multi-barrel rocket launchers and the tube artillery systems, and they couldn't really coordinate, nor did they have an inkling really of where which of the thrust axes, as it were. And the incursion seemed to succeed. Of course, the Ukrainians also diffused themselves very quickly and created these small pockets in and around Russian positions, thereby creating a dilemma for Russian artillery units that were further back, wherein they could have only struck those units by also engaging friendly forces, while not being able to minimize friendly force attrition. So that was a dilemma the Ukrainians presented the Russians with in August 2024. Having said that, we have also seen how armor has really struggled on the battlefield as well in Russia, in the Russo-Ukraine war, and which has of course led to perhaps premature sort of declarations about the obsolescence of the of the main battle tank itself as a platform, and so on and so forth. But as you know, nothing ever goes away in this world. It has to sort of reinvent itself, has to reposition itself, and of course doctrines evolve over time. Anyway, with that preamble, I think we should go straight to Brigadier Rathore and get his views on it. Thank you for joining us, Brigadier Rathore. I have so let's get to it. How do you see, armored warfare? I mean, mechanized warfare in general, evolving in the say in the next decade or so, given what we've seen in the recent past?
see in the next decade or so will be a very sort of a narrow, closed timeline. Things are not going to change much in the next decade or so. But over time, I would say what is going to really change the way armored vehicles are employed on the battlefield is these new technologies like artificial intelligence and robotics. And technologies in power, transmission, fire control systems, gun systems. The new technologies will make a lot of difference there because of these AI and like what we are seeing, drones and all that. The method of application of armor is also going to change. How it is going to change, that is still a question which is being debated, I suppose, at various levels. Different countries will come to different conclusions. The Ukrainian conflict is, we cannot say, is the benchmark of how armored warfare is going to evolve because we have not seen large scale employment of armor. The employment of forces in Ukraine, particularly the Russian forces, is dictated by their operational aims. And their operational aims were limited. So they were not interested in going in for deep strikes or deep penetrations and capturing large areas of Ukraine. Because that was, I presume, is not their operational objective. They're interested in certain areas which they have occupied. And the war has sort of tapered off into a largely infantry-oriented conflict where both the sides are trying to maintain their lines and have minor, sort of advantageous positions at tactical level. But I don't think the Russians at any point earlier or now are interested in operations as what they had carried out during World War II in the same region where a large high-level forces were launched and carried out deep strikes into the Germans who were defending in this area at that point in time. But as far as future is concerned, and which will also have a bearing on our own FRCV project, is what is critical in my view is how technology is going to evolve, what technologies we should push for, and that should be based on a clear vision, a clear operational vision as to how we intend to employ our armored forces, or any force for that matter. Allow me to give you an example. Post World War I, when tanks were first introduced towards the latter half of World War I, and in the 1930s, various countries were working on their own armored vehicles. The French, the British, the Germans. Now, the French and the British, largely, as per the operational doctrine, the tank was supposed to be supporting infantry in battle. So they evolved tanks. It was called infantry tank, like the Matilda. Various other tanks. There were multi-turreted tanks, and there were the cruiser tanks, which were supposed to be exploiting breakthroughs which have been achieved. So that was one, you can say, line of development of armor between the two wars. The Germans had a different operational vision. They viewed armor to be employed en masse in a structured organization. Armored forces are only one system in a number of systems which are operating simultaneously. You have your artillery, your air force, armor, infantry, mechanized infantry. What we call system of systems, if I'm to use a current term. And so their armor design, which evolved, the Panzer Mark 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on, they were designed for the sort of conflict that they envisioned their forces will be conducting. Their operational vision, which was later, which influenced the design of their armored fighting vehicles. Now, in our case, I think we should be following a similar approach. At the moment, this whole FRCV thing is a little, in my view, it's a little bit of a question mark. Because first, we should be very clear how future warfare will take place. There is going to be a big change in how warfare will be fought in the future. Already there is talk of the Russians using large amount of drones and all that for close air support so that their own manned aircraft are not threatened, particularly in the Kursk salient where they are fighting the Ukrainians. So the methodology of warfare is going to undergo change, a major change, and therefore our FRCB should be able to participate in that new form of employment, and it should be so technologically sort of equipped. Uh, so at the moment, I'll leave it here. As the discussion progresses, we will touch upon certain aspects also. But I see a major change coming in as far as employment of forces on battlefield is concerned, particularly in view of the emerging technologies that are now influencing the battlefield, as we have seen in Ukraine, the drones and various other types of both ground-based and aerial equipment which is being fielded, which at the moment is in a very nascent form. It's, you can call it just the initial stages, and this is going to evolve, and it will evolve very fast. So we have to keep up with that technology, and we'll have to change, keep pace with the change, if I may say, put it that way. Yeah.
Right. Very succinctly put. And circling back to what you said, each country will come up with possibly different line of inquiry, and thereby, and very likely a different answer for what it wants to do. And naturally, doctrinaire is what will guide it. Now, of course, some of the things will be common to everyone, and that is that what we are seeing in terms of platforms, whether big or small, is that there is far more there is far greater onboard processing capacity today and capability today in platforms, whether it be a small drone or whether it be a tank, right? And AI based systems are enabling even faster onboard processing, and we are seeing network systems across the battlefield, some of which will be manned, some will be unmanned. You will have a collaborative combat force being employed, whether in all domains really, whether on land, on air, or in the sea. So now the thing is that but some principles do not change. For instance, recently we've read from both Ukrainian and Russian sources. One of the problems that the Ukrainians have faced on the battlefield is that they are not being able to hold territory, both because of a lack of infantry units and because of mobile protected firepower in the form of heavy MBTs also. And what is happening is they are ending up using their first person view drones even for very short range engagements. Usually what has happened today is that first person view drones are being used mainly, especially the fiber optic channel ones, they are being employed at what traditionally used to be artillery range, 105 millimeter artillery range, 12 to 18 kilometers away, and now even further on, 155 millimeter artillery range. But in the case of the Ukrainians, because of a paucity of traditional fighting units, they have had to use their FPV drone units have had to strike targets as less as 30 meters away once they've been surrounded, once the pocket has been surrounded by enemy infantry, which has sort of been dropped off by APCs some distance from their objective and managed to come in anyway. So tell me something. I'll obviously return to Brigadier Rathore at the earliest, but just to bring Shriram into the conversation, what do you think, Shriram, then is the real strategic issue at hand over here? Is it about the employment of armor, or is it or the answer lies in your industrial base, really being able to sort of pitch an answer that has been sort of been found on the battlefield through the experience of the practitioner, the user? What do you think is the main macro level problem that needs to be solved?
Let's hope there's no echo today.
It better not be. Yeah.
Building on what Brigadier Rathore had said, ultimately, be it armor, infantry, artillery, all of them are tools of war. How they're employed is up to the men on the ground to employ them as they fit to achieve the objective. Now, what the objective is drives your doctrine, weapons development programs, industrial capacity building, policy making towards that, all of that. So unless there is a, okay, you can't pinpoint future objectives, but at least a broad based uh, let's say idea of what you want your armed forces to achieve in say a particular time frame, let's say 10 years from now, 25 years from now. 50 might be a bit of a stretch, but at least you can give blue sky ideas for your the guys in the white lab coats to think about. But the 10 and 25, any government or ministry or the higher level think tank guys should be able to determine what your objective will be, or let's say in a set of objectives for which you can derive a doctrine which the armed forces and the civil side and industry can all come together and lay out a broad framework, and from that all of these guys can sit together and develop another framework for weapons development. How it will be used on the battlefield on that day is obviously up to the war fighters. And given our history, we've fought multiple wars with equipment that has not been as, let's say, cutting edge as what our adversaries had. And still we came out on top. So the confidence in that side of things is pretty high. Now, how do you equip them with something that can help them fight that day and adapt on a daily basis when you are actively fighting? For that, you need an industrial capability, right? Which can churn out, multiple variants, add on, let's say, additional modes on a particular platform, or fight a particular new tactic that the enemy has developed. All of that requires a massive industrial capacity in the back, where you have guys running factories and doing designs who can change things on the fly. The guy on the front, be it a colonel or a brigadier or a general, somebody calls up this guy and says, this is what we're facing, we need a solution immediately. That will not happen if you have an imported system, right? You can't call up somebody sitting in another continent and ask them, we need a solution right away. That will not happen. How you get all of this together is the work of the Ministry of Defense. And that is something that has to be done. And I hope it is done. Now, as far as, let's say, 5 years from now, right? One of the things that we shut down maybe 10 years ago was the battle management system program. I think it has been resurrected in another name recently, but that is something we should have done. Networked all our land, air, and sea forces together. Our SDR program is coming up now. Should have been done earlier, but yeah, Deraya, Durustaya, and all of that. Networking everybody, getting them to work in a electronics and, let's say, airspace denied environment, and also be able to work in a networked environment. Not just the guy sitting inside a vehicle, but the guy who's taking decisions in the back. The big picture, the guy playing chess on the chessboard. So all of this requires a lot of bandwidth, a lot of hardware, a lot of thinking, which has to go into how to network all of them efficiently without spilling, electromagnetic signature everywhere. So again, all of this requires a lot of work within the country, because then you can ideate and iterate and get a network solution. And it's not just the surface, subsurface side of things or the aerial side of things which need a lot of unmanned systems. I know there is this thought in the back of our minds that we have 1.5 billion population and we can always throw men at any problem and get it to a stalemate. But even though it might seem like a superfluous solution to a problem that we already have a solution to, getting unmanned systems, especially in mountains or even in deserts for that matter, because we've seen that if you're out in the open, irrespective of whether you're emitting or not, you can still be found. If a carrier can be found in the big, huge oceans, land forces on land can be found out. the time required to find and prosecute the target is a different issue. But if you can see it, you can hit it, is the mantra these days. So you need a lot of unmanned systems to go into places where we were sending young soldiers in the wars of yesterday. I would think personally that you would send unmanned systems in front, just like how we have the CATS program, right? You send unmanned fleets ahead, controlled by manned platforms in the back, and but nobody's saying the tank is become obsolete. It will still have a role to play, but having a network system here would help you save manpower, let's say more efficiently utilize your manpower, but you still have mass which will be cheaper to produce. And when it comes to the holding ground part of the armor's role, it can still be done by manned platforms. I would ask Brigadier Rathore, because you've seen how the army operates in multiple terrains, as to how you think this can be done, because we have deserts, we have forests, we have high altitude conditions. How do you see building solutions for all of them? Because ultimately my personal opinion is that we should find Indian solutions to our challenges rather than just get what the Europeans and the Americans are doing.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The last point is very important. We have to find our own solutions rather than go by what others propose to us as our solution ought to be. Till now, to a very large extent, we have been dependent on these people to tell us, when you take the case of the RFP for the FRCV, we are asking them as to what do you say is the FRCV and what capabilities it should be having and all that, and then we will look at them and then decide which all capabilities. I think we should have worked on it the other way around. We should have been very sure as to what capabilities our system should be having. Based on our geographical terrain available, we have deserts, plains, mountains, we have canal-based defenses, we have mountains, the Himalayas, jungles, we have and the eastern sector, we have terrain which is interspersed with rivers and streams. So, our fighting conditions are very unique. And we also have to see does one size fit all? That is, in all our varied different terrains, whether we should be using the same tank. And so then the QR that we give for that tank is so that it can fight in the desert, in the plains, in the mountains, in the riverine terrain and all that, or should we be looking at systems which are sort of designed to operate in those areas? This is one area which we need to look at, because till now we were dependent on just one system working everywhere. Because we were to a large extent we were dependent on importing our systems. Very few systems of our own we have been able to push into service, but that should change. But that's one point. The second point that you had made, one of the points amongst the points that you had made, was having a sort of a collaborative development system. Now, that is very important. All major weapon development countries, or major powers, if I may say, whether it's the US, Russia, or China, if I can take these three examples, they have at the apex level a committee that decides on how their armies will be equipped. It cannot be left in our scheme of things. The impression that I get, it is more of a project-based approach. You have a Tejas project. So you funded, underfunded, defunded. It drags on, or for that matter, MBT Arjun, they said it is too heavy and all that. I mean, there are a lot of things were thrown at it, which I don't agree to, fundamentally. And so what appears is that our equipment development, weapon system development, is more of a function of who's heading the project at that point in time. At the army, if the at the apex level there is a change, then the thought process also may undergo a change. That's why you find these GSQRs and all that being modified so frequently. That is one of the reasons. So the military and the people and the scientific community and the people who are going to manufacture, they're all operating at in different you know compartmentalized organizations. The collaboration is limited and maybe at the highest level, but where at the working level there seems to be not much collaboration. And I can say when this MBT Arjun project was on the Armored Corps, at that time, initially, I mean, if I can remember in the 90s, 80s and 90s, they used to have one or two armored officers in CVRD and all that interacting with them. And this was not the way this project should have been taken. Everybody has to buy in and everybody has to be equally accountable. If things don't work out well, they better have very good reasons as to why things have not worked out. And if somebody is not performing, out it goes and should be replaced by somebody. So there has to be a body which is monitoring all this, a body which is driving this, an organization which is headed by, all our decision making about these various weapon system developments can't be left just to bureaucrats who change every 2 years. I mean, there has to be a apex organization which is sort of controlling this and pushing this, and there is a buy-in document which everybody has committed to, and thereafter they stay committed. We would have cut down our timelines very significantly. We would have cut down our costs very significantly if we had sort of pushed our own indigenous systems and rather than this, sometimes here and sometimes there, sometimes with it, sometimes not with it. Somebody making loose statements that this is a three-legged cheetah and all that. That's not the way you develop systems. This is not development of weapons system is not an individual's ego. It's a national project, and it has to be treated with respect, and it must be pushed through with all the effort and the resources that we have at our disposal, because it is critical for our nation's security. And it is when you now look at Ukraine and you see that if the Western countries pull the plug, the bottom will fall out of Ukraine because he has no capability. He has no very limited industrial capability. He's just dependent on exports. So as long as the export pipeline is coming in, the man will keep pumping in something. So that is not the way that like in Kargil, we were flying in 155 ammunition from Israel and all that. That's not the way a nation will be able to take on big threats. Kargil was just a small operation. So it's very important that we organize ourselves better. We need to organize ourselves better. And we need joint collaboration between the users, that is the military, the scientific community, and the people who are going to manufacture as to how things are going to be. They need to sit down and see as to what all emerging technologies can do, and therefore need to think as if this is what emerging technology can do, what effect will it have on the battlefield, and so therefore what are the systems that we need to develop. We are at the stage, if I can again give an example of World War One, when the machine gun was introduced in large numbers, everybody thought that the mobility has gone out of the battlefield. And infantry was dying in huge numbers. 50,000 dead casualties per day was quite the norm in World War One, till armor was introduced and it restored mobility, right? And it restored maneuver. Now, uh, in with these drones and all coming in and these new technologies and all coming in, we are at the stage as to the older systems are may not be good enough, but what is more important is how should the new systems be, and that is the big question mark, and for that requires an intense application of the mind, and it if we are just going to again carry out a cut copy paste sort of a approach. Yeah, that is what is good for that guy. It may work here. This, then we may be on the wrong track, unfortunately. So we need to do a review of how we are approaching the development of these new systems, and particularly now that we are talking in this program about the FRCV, we need to do a review. I would say, do we need a FRCV at all? I mean, which country in the world? The British, the French, the Israelis, the Germans, the Americans. Which of them is developing an FRCV? As far as my knowledge is concerned, no, they are not developing any FRCV. There is no FRCV project. What they are working very hard on is technology. Better transmission systems, better tracks, better road wheels, better engines, hybrid drives, better guns. You know, all these systems will be put together into design once they have got their thought processes clear as to how they're going to fight the future conflict. At the moment, they are focusing on technologies, and on the other hand, as far as the current fleet of vehicles is concerned, they are utilizing these technologies in their latest versions so that to make them that much more capable and sustainable over the next 15, 20, or 25 years. And that is the sort of time span we are looking at. So, this is what I have to say on this.
Okay, that's very interesting, and I think of the many things that India learned from the Soviet Union, one thing it did not learn was the need for a state defense committee to basically coordinate all the disparate entities that make up a government, as it were, for a proper war production effort. Now, as things have been 12 years ago, something like a WANET or a MENET, a mobile ad hoc network, was a big deal, right? But today it's not. Today the question is, what kind of MENET, what kind of SDR? The questions are much far more granular right now, right? And the point about technologies, that is the one I am sort of picking up on, because that's the most pertinent point. Nobody is quite clear what will become obsolete even 10 months from now. So, but what this is doing is, it is presenting a new set of issues for the defense industry of all major countries, in that what armies especially, much less than air forces, armies currently want, small batch production items, small batch production of not small items, large items. I'll give you an example. So one of the, like we discussed earlier, that different countries will come up with different answers. So the French, of course, are focusing on the Scorpion program, right? They have three, and the three marquee products in that are all wheeled armored fighting vehicles, and they are not really small in any way, but they are supposed to operate in a networked environment of man unmanned teaming in a collaborative combat system, as part of a collaborative combat system. And what they're doing is, they are still sort of studying what they want for the main ground combat system, which will be again a family of systems. It won't be just one system, it will be a system of systems in its own right. And in the interim, they are re-equipping their Leclerc tanks to basically operate in a network environment, where where it's a netted system, where somebody may have sent something and somebody else will sort of prosecute the target, obviously in a much much smaller geographical expanse than what you can achieve, say, in the air or sea domains, right? Because it's, after all, land we are talking about. But the main point is that they are all struggling in some sense, as compared to the Chinese and Russian systems, which are not driven by the profit motive, really, right? At least as far as their defense industries are concerned at the moment, is that they're finding it difficult to get their usual contractors to agree to this kind of a small batch production system, which nevertheless has the capability to engage in a long production run of something standardized that has been found to be useful even for a period of 3 to 5 years. So, and in our case, given what we've seen, where we've been dependent on, not just the thing being imported, but on the thinking itself, we have been dependent both on the thing and the thinking, right? We are still sort of bringing out RFIs for 1770 units of a future-ready combat vehicle, basically the next generation main battle tank, right? And we are going to sort of employ that force-wide. Whereas the current thinking is what Shriram was saying, that it should be the case that today the situation in the Ukraine war is such that even a colonel of the Ukrainian army should be able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody to get something. That is what it has become. That is how messed up the situation is on the battlefield because of the emergence of new technologies. So on the other hand, what we are talking about is fleet-wide employment of some system produced in the thousands, and whose specifications have been basically written keeping the foreign thinking in mind. So we are not really where we should be at the moment, in my view at least. And we have to be far more agile, and to be agile technologically, you have no option but to embrace indigenization, because that is the option. You have to respond quickly. You can't respond quickly if you're dependent on foreign MICs, which have been designed around some other doctrine, around other objectives, and in a different environment altogether. So with that in mind, let us go back into the past, because Brigadier Rathore is of course also is very familiar with some of the ways in which programs have been run in the past. Now, one of the two key programs that were run in India, or have been run still till date, have been of course the LCA Tejas in the air domain, and the MBT Arjun project, which also started way back and went through many different iterations. And so, before I turn to Brigadier Rathore again, I have one question to. I'll just lay out something. 12 prototypes of the MBT Arjun were built, and 15 pre-production standard units were built. Right, 27 units of this tank was of this basic design was built with different specifications to account for different running gear, to account for the imported hydropneumatic suspension system, then the indigenous one. Then of course, initially the engine specifications were different. At first there was an engine that was only 1000 HP, then that was changed to 1500 HP. Then when the indigenous tank engine sort of did not take off. By the way, the Datran 1500 is not the first indigenous power pack designed in India or even prototyped. A program ran to build a 1500 horsepower engine, of which three prototypes were built between 75 and 85 before the whole thing was abandoned in 87, despite consultancy from AVL of Austria, which used to provide consultancy to third world countries on land platform engines and stuff like that. And then this MTU Renk 1400 HP design was adopted, which is a water cooled engine, right? Although an air cooled engine sort of suits our conditions better, and the one we had designed earlier was an air cooled engine. So, giving that in mind, do you think, Brigadier Rathore, given the way that program unfolded, what do you think should be, given the lessons of that program, what do you think should be inculcated today into, say, cavalry officers to ensure the buy-in that you talked about? Because that is what was lacking in the program, right? There was no real buy-in at the end of the day, except from a few perhaps. So what do you think should be the way forward then to ensure that buy-in?
Well, as far as the MBT Arjun is concerned, I can say with a fair degree of confidence that late General Hanuj Singh, was one of the key people who were involved in drawing up its qualitative requirements. He had major influence based on his standing in the Armored Corps. And he was a great proponent of this project. In fact, I can tell you that he delayed conversion of Pune horse from Vijay tanks to T-72s for a long time because they used to keep saying the Arjun will come into service next year, but it never happened. So finally, he did allow the regiment to convert. But he was always very keen that Pune horse be one of the first regiments to convert to T-72, to the Arjun. Now, Arjun is a very good example of how a project should not be handled. It is, I would put this on one side of the table, and I would put on the other side of the table the Markava project. The Markava project was handled as a national project. They made a team of serving and retired military officers, of scientists, of the companies who specialize in various systems like engines, transmissions, fire control systems, guns, Elbit, IAI, and a whole lot of companies which are involved, the vendors as you call them. And they went at it, and they went at it in a evolutionary manner. They set realistic goals, and thereafter they kept sort of evolving that product. It started as a Mark 1, which was little better than a Centurion. The Mark 2, Mark 3, Mark 4, now the Bars is probably one of the world's best tanks. So what you have is the same platform with different electronics, different software, changes in its gun, but fundamentally the design remains the same. So obviously they designed a good product. As far as we were concerned, and if I can say that as per whatever information is available on the internet, the Israelis did come and have a look at the Arjun as per these reports, and they were very favorably sort of impressed by the way the tank had evolved. But somewhere down the line, we got stuck on the weight, and when all other arguments failed, and what sort of torpedoed this project was the numbers, like what you're saying. The French are ordering a few hundreds or 150 vehicles and such, like you order 127 tanks or some figure like that. Mark 1A they've ordered another 120 tanks. But that's not how India has very difficult sort of operational conditions. We have very dynamic and dangerous enemies. We are not the French, who don't have the enemy at the gates. We as a country have two enemies at the gates and another one half lurking within. Now, under such conditions, you can't have an under-equipped force, and neither can you have an outdated force. But we have to make up our minds, we have to decide and adopt a platform which will stand the test of time and which can be modified over time. That's why when you said over a decade and all that, I said that's a very short timeline. Today, even the Americans are not thinking of replacing the M1A2, or the Germans are not thinking of replacing the Leopard for the next 20 years, maybe more. The same vehicle with modifications, with evolutionary improvements will continue. And they will at the same time, on a parallel axis, examine as how things are evolving on the technological front, carry out intense research, development, and then keep incorporating on these vehicles or come up with a new design, an evolutionary design or an absolutely new design at a later point in time. So that is an approach. As far as we are, the way I see it is we have a perfectly good, well-designed tank already available. The T-72 and the T-90 are now at the end of their design development cycle. They have limited capability for any further improvement. Whereas the Arjun is on the starting blocks. sort of it is a design which is a starting block, and very importantly, it is our own design, so we can change it at will, the way we want to, and incorporate technologies in it at the way we want to, instead of falling on to the Russians or taking a clearance from Russians that this is your license built the copy. So can we change its engine, or can we change its something, or can we do this to the transmission or something? So we already have a very good platform. I mean, if you look carefully at the RFP which has come out for the Arjun, I mean, it's a four-man for the FRCV. Firstly, I don't like these new acronyms. IPMV. Why not call it an APC version of the WAP, right? What is IPMV? So these new acronyms do not mean it's a new vehicle. It just means that then somebody will start differentiating between the APC and the IPMV. I'm just on the lighter side. Now, as far as Arjun is concerned, we already have a very good platform. It will evolve with time, with technology. It is, in my personal opinion, it is already superior to the equipment it is going to replace, and it has the potential of becoming exceedingly superior with improvements of technology as newer technologies are incorporated. We made a fundamental mistake when we opted for the 838 engine. That went out of production. The MTU was bought up by this German company called L3. The American company called L3, and which only manufactures 883 MTU 883. 838, neither the American L3 manufactures the MTU now, is part of L3. And in Germany, in any case, the production line has been closed up. So somebody who was taking these decisions at that time of continuing to stick to the 838, we sort of torpedoed the project ourselves. And now to get this our own 1500 horsepower engine, I think that should be our red hot priority. And we have sort of painted ourselves into a corner. And this is what happens when you don't have, like what Saurav was saying, when you don't have an apex body at the national level, which is monitoring these programs and holding people accountable. When it becomes a ministerial initiative, where I'm there for 2 years, I sign a few files, and I'm off, and then somebody else comes, he has a different view, he puts on something different. Changes take place in the military leadership domain, and some people have some views. People always have different views. They are welcome to the views, but a view which has been taken at a national level, well, that better become everybody's view. And then you push. So if you make a mistake, that's a mistake at the national level. But that is quite unlikely to happen, because the brightest minds of the country have applied themselves, and they have come up with a line of action which is to be taken, a direction which is to be taken, and then come what may, we stick to that line. It cannot be left to the egos. I mean, I was shocked to hear recently one of the chiefs say that why develop everything ourselves? We should just take the 5 best technologies from different countries. Now, on the other hand, when we are seeing the utter mayhem that is being created in Ukraine just because of lack of capacities, the lack of technologies, I mean, you look at the Chinaman, he has all the technologies that it.
Yes.
Now you're going to pit yourself against that sort of an adversary who has the capabilities, the capacities, the scientific ability, and their equipment systems are second to none. In Russia, they have this tank biathlon they used to have before the war broke out. I think we also participated in that twice, and we didn't do too well. The Chinaman's tank always came second. The first was always the Russians, but the Chinaman's tank came second. in the tank biathlon. But that was not the only competition. There was competition with the infantry, for the mechanized, and for the artillery and all that. The whole series of this military competition thing that Russia used to do. In more than 65% to 70%, they used to stand first, which was never reported, right? So we really need to take a relook at the direction that we are heading in. I'm of the view, and it is not still too late to course correct, but we, if I may give you another example, our infantry used to use the 7.62 till it went out of fashion, and we went to switch to 5.56, and then realized, oh, that's not too good enough. So we went back to 7.62, but the rest of the world, and now we don't know. Some of us are on 7.62 51, and others are on 7.62 39, and the world is contemplating changing over to 6.8.
6.8.
Now, so are we going to say that after another 7, 8 years or 10 years, when the countries switch over, new systems, weapons, new rifles are designed, we are going to change our whole 10 lakh army's rifles back to some new caliber which has been introduced? So obviously, at the decision-making level, there were some confusions, if I may put it that way.
Excellently put, Brigadier Rathore. Before I turn to Shriram, I'll just try to mention one thing. Is that this time, of course, DRDO is ready with a 6.8 into 43 caliber rifle beforehand, understanding that the demand will come soon for something that shoots Remington SPCs. Okay, basically, so they are ready. They are future ready in that sense. But the Brigadier Rathore has raised excellent points, and of course, given our sentiments, you would know that we agree in toto. The point is that you must take us through the Datran 1500, what the state of affairs is, etc. And you also do a bit of a throwback to the time of the accelerated user reliability trials that were done in 2007, 2008, and the comparative trials that happened simultaneously, because that sort of will give the viewer a overview of just how good the Arjun platform can be and how much evolutionary development is still left. Over to you.
Yeah. So let me just put this up just for people to have a look. Okay. So that's the 1500 horsepower engine that was on display at Aero India last month. The engine is going to the US for testing, because apparently we've given testing infra the go by. So a brand new engine for our main battle tanks has to go abroad for testing. Be that as it may, I spoke to the people manning the stall, and there were young chaps who were part of the program. And let's say that, the amount of money that is being spent to send this outside for testing is 2-3 times at least the amount of money that we would require to set up a similar setup here to bench test our own engines. Because until now, even at Bemel, Mysore, I think, they do not have the facilities to test diesel engine this way, even though they've been part of the program to develop the engine. Anyway, be that as it may, the engine is apparently expected to work flawlessly. At least that's what the guy was confidently claiming. Let's hope it works and we can put it in the engine, in the tank. As far as why it is happening only now is sort of a sad story. I'm pretty sure everybody knows that, let me get this off the screen, knows that our diesel engine making prowess, be it in DPSCs or even the commercial market, is not that great. We've had to rely on foreign engines for almost nearly the entire auto sector. We've had some progress. I'm sure we'll get better, but there's been very little push from the defense side. We now have marine engine uh, program PLI for our ships, diesel engines. So that and this together should push us forward, as long as the engines go through trials properly and we finally get orders. Hopefully at a reasonable time, so that the industries who are part of the program in development can make some money, and we can go on for the next iteration, make it better, Mark 2, Mark 3 and everything. So that's as far as the 1500 horsepower engines story goes. We'll
No,
wait for the engine to come. Yeah, please go ahead.
I'll have to say something.
Sure.
Most of the high horsepower engines being used by PLA are MTU license made versions and later on converted to Chinese made sort of variations or varieties. So the Chinese, they also probably were in sort of a similar sort of situation when there's ZTZ and other tanks were under development, and they needed better engines, and Russian engines were not good enough and not having adequate horsepower as what they wanted. So they went for MT engines, and they went in at a very early stage for license manufacture. Maybe initially it may have been assembling, but then they went in for license manufacture, and I suppose progressively they would have achieved 100% indigenous components, indigenization. And that was the right approach. If we were pushing a MBT project, engine was a key thing. I mean, how can you push a major national project with the engine not in your hands? But because the project kept dragging, in fact, the MBT Arjun, which is the Mark 1, which is in service, is the version which was already available in 1990. It came into service in 2000. With a few bolts, few changes here and a few changes there. Fundamentally, it is the same product. There is nothing very much difference in the 1990 version of the Arjun under trials and the 2000 version which came into service as Mark 1. So, but the project just kept being dragged, and so key decisions were not taken, and we remained hooked up to buying things and not building up capabilities. I mean, it is the indigenous engine development should have been a parallel project, and the first thing that they should have set up is testing facilities. Even our jet engines go to Russia and other countries for testing. Our heavy duty, high horsepower engines go to some other countries for testing. I'm sure we have, if we get down to it, we need to spend that money. So these decisions, somebody has to take. Obviously, these are decisions which go beyond the ministerial, departmental sort of capabilities, and they need to be taken at the national level. And so that
to add to your point,
the whole Arjun project is not just dependent on this Detran engine coming through. I mean, the sort of situation that we have landed ourselves in.
Yeah, to add to your point, actually, before the orders were placed, MDU as well as RENC, both of them had offered setting up a local production line if we would give them a minimum order of 400 or 500 units. But in our great wisdom, we placed the 100 and odd unit order, for which they said it does not make financial sense to set up any local production. So again, if we had stretched just that little bit and said, okay, we will give you a commitment of 500 units. Please come here and set up a line, with a partner if you want, or even your own Indian company, you can set up subsidiary. We could have done that, and we wouldn't have, a case where the tank is pilloried for having a high import content. When there is no economic sense to indigenizing any article on the tank itself, let alone something as expensive as the gearbox or the engine itself.
No Indian company will also set up anything for a 120 tank order, leave alone a foreign company.
Does not
I mean,
make
if you
sense.
think any Indian company will set up a transmission or a track manufacturing line for 118 tank order, you got it. I don't think so. They're going to do that. So, uh, fundamentally, in Arjun, we have a very good platform. And that is the platform that should be built upon. I mean, we were talking about how, I mean, we were discussing when this QR Jal Hanul Singh was closely involved. And you're going to talk about the comparative trials or the comparative sort of some sort of comparison to health. I mean, it's after that I will come and I will give my views on that. But I think you should cover that because that's a very important thing. You are comparing one equipment which has reached the end of its development cycle to an equipment which is starting its development cycle and has the capability to carry you for the next 20, 30 years or maybe more. And uh, how the results of these trials are pitched. You see, so I mean, when you give out your views on that, things will become that much more clear.
Sure, let's
Yeah.
go through AUCRT then quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before we get to that, let's just take a quick look at the comparison. This was from a CAG report, as far as I remember.
2015, yes.
Yeah, a quick comparison between the Arjun and the T90, which is and still is the Army's main battle tank today. As you can see, the Arjun clearly outperformed the T90. And see, when somebody sits back and says, fine, we have two platforms which are near equal, and our own platform is, let's say, slightly better. And if we make hundreds of this, we push a lot of money that we are anyway going to spend back into our own economy, and we can build up and grow certain industries where we severely lack, like the engine and gearbox that we were just talking about. So if we had done that, this was mid 2000s and late 2000s. By now, we could have roped in any of your automobile industry to come and co-develop or manufacture all the drivetrain related systems by now, instead of having to pay hundreds of crores to the Russians again.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second before you return to this on the point. See,
Yeah.
Indian industry has always been patriotic and responsive also. I'll just give one example, okay? In the late 80s and early 90s, because our programs are watched very closely by the Americans and thereby the Germans, the piston seals for the hydropneumatic suspension unit that goes into the Arjun, or that went into the basically the pre-production pre-production systems that were built, was suddenly denied by Walter Hunger of Germany, right? And then what had to be done was a crash program was launched together with fluorocarbon seals of Chennai, under which the high pressure piston seals for the HSU, the hydropneumatic suspension unit, were actually indigenized. And that is what went into the PPS units, the 15 PPS units that were then used in the trials that happened in 1995 and 96. Right? So it's not like Indian industry cannot respond, but it comes down to the same old thing. It cannot, all this cannot be ad hoc. There has to be something like a state defense committee overseeing all this with all the data at its disposal, knowing what is indigenized, what is not, down to the 6-digit level, and be able to identify somebody quickly to do the needful. Right, let's go back to what you were saying.
Yeah. Before we go back, I'll add one more anecdote. In an entirely unrelated industry, take space for instance. ISRO, as everybody knows, does very few launches every year, and even further back, say 10, 15 years back, it was even lower rates. So we, Saurav and I, happened to talk to the owner of a company who made specialized forgings and metal parts. So apparently ISRO, one person from ISRO came to them and said, can you manufacture this particular part this particular way for us, because this is a critical item and we're not able to get it from abroad. So these guys stopped their production line, retooled, made very few units. I think ISRO wanted less than 10. So they made those parts, gave it to ISRO at pretty much a loss, right? If you have to stop a production line, make something bespoke, and then return to your production line, you are losing money. But because ISRO, doing something for ISRO has a patriotism connotation, and these guys wanted to contribute to India's space program, they said, let's do it, even if we lose money. And made the product that ISRO wanted, and then retooled and went back to their production line and continued. So it's not that the private sector is always focused on money, does not have patriotism, does not wish to contribute to any national program or project or in times of need. I think whoever thinks that way can disabuse themselves of that opinion, because that is not how things work. Anyway, anecdotes aside, AUCRT. Now, after a lot of cases where the army kept getting pulled up saying there is insufficient support for the Arjun program, as well as them CVRD meeting certain timelines and requirements, the army then went into something called an accelerated user trial, where the tanks would get run through hundreds and thousands of hours of operation, as well as gun firing and whatever the tank is supposed to be used for. And the tank came out with flying colors. We had, okay, let's not go there. Let's not go to the gearbox issues and what happened. But again, the tank came through with flying colors, and see, any product that you're developing will have observations. So what you do is you accept the product as it is, and then say, these are things that I want fixed in this particular timeline, but I will go ahead and give you orders so that you can work on these also. That is how tranches work. And it does not matter whether you're making an INS GPS chip or something big like a large transport aircraft. The size of it does not matter. What matters is bunching requirements, having a roadmap as to what requirements are immediately required and what you can push for the next tranche, and providing scale for the manufacturer to still stay in business and work on the program. If you're going to tell him, continue working on this, 3 years down the line, I will come back and check your product. And then if that meets my then requirements, I will think about placing orders, which might take another 5 years to go through an MOD bureaucracy and our DAPP and all of that bureaucracies. So, to give you another anecdote, I know we keep bringing up anecdotes, right? But let me give you one more. Unrelated industry, but it is an open seminar. I was sitting and there were a bunch of ministry officials and researchers and everybody. One guy from an IIT stands up right at the back and says, see, I have a small startup. I have 10 guys who I have to pay IIT and pass out level salaries. And I'm having to wait years for payments to be made. And the product that I'm pitching has to be on an NC basis. NC stands for no cost, no commitment. As in, the army will not give you money to pitch your product and for trials and however long it takes for them to finally end up making the mind and sending it to MOD and then making up their minds and placing an order and finally money getting released to you. But you still have to pay all these high functioning individuals that you have in your company until say 8 years, 10 years, however long it takes for you to actually start getting money. So in let's say computer science, algorithms, higher level mathematics, networking, there is zero chance that you will hold on to people in today's scenario, because you have GCCs right here in Bangalore and Hyderabad and Madras and Pune and everywhere else. So if you tell somebody that, stay motivated for 5 years, your product may or may not get into production, this will not happen in today's world, right? If you want to have world-class products, you need world-class people working in a world-class setup, and you also have to pay them, right? So unless this whole cycle is accelerated, or where, like we were talking about earlier, right, unless you have the Mark 1 Mark 2 trans based system where this whole cycle is shorter, that is when you can keep such people motivated. No matter how brilliant and or not you are, everybody likes seeing things made and getting the product in their hands. If that does not happen, the motivation goes for a toss, and so you might have to settle for somebody second best. See, ultimately tech, I know this anecdote goes around the internet a lot, saying one Russian guy saying what technology, I am the technology. Ultimately it is the people who develop things. Somebody who spent 30 years in the industry will guide the next generation. So if you take 20 years for one product to come out, everybody who's worked on the program is retired. And we've made this point earlier too. Mr. Siddiq, who's ex director of GTRE, moaned and cried, saying they're bleeding people because they do not have a follow-on engine program, and it has not been done in the time that it should have been. So I know. Coming back to the AUCRT trials, I think they did 8,000 hours of testing and 150 plus firings, if I'm not wrong, of the main gun, including the AP rounds and the HESS rounds. And the tank passed the trials beautifully. There were always things to be improved, things that the army wanted done differently, but should have been done. And this was the late 2000s. So by 2015, 2016, we should have orders. And even recently, the order numbers were pitiful. We had 400 plus T90 orders against 100 and something odd Arjun orders. Again, how would you improve indigenization percentage? Or even if the army or DRDO goes to the private sector, and like Brigadier Rathore said, if the army or DRDO goes to the private sector and says, we have 120 tanks, okay, put together maybe 250 tanks, can you please indigenize this component? It will not happen. They say it makes zero sense financially.
If you order 120 tanks in a tranche, the span between the two orders better not be more than 2 to 3 years. Okay, it has to be as simple as that. Before I bring in Brigadier Rathore again, I'll quickly go through what came after that. So in 2009, there was an IMI validation study done on the Arjun. That is when the IMI guys, in front of a full audience, and I believe there were close to 120 people in attendance in that. Okay, I'm being a little specific here because the story was told to me by somebody who was present there. In front of all of them, they said that this is a desert Ferrari, right? That was the term used. But of course, even then, and of course, then came the famous comparative trial in the winter, subsequent winter, between Arjun and T90, and 5 tanks were chosen. 5 production lot Arjun Mark 1 tanks were chosen, and 5 T90s which were there in service with the Indian Army already were chosen. And the net result was that, of course, in the overall, when the overall scoring was done, the T90 came slightly ahead, but there were many caveats over there. One of the main caveats was the T90 was allowed to use the Invar UBK barrel fired missile, the reflex basically, whereas the Arjun, because of the minimum range requirement, could not feel the Lahat at that time. Later on, of course, the Arjun Mark 1 is supposed to use the CLGM, etc. So let us turn to somebody who had an insider view of things. And Brigadier Rathore, what are your comments on this issue, the whole comparative trial that happened and what we saw subsequently?
What I can say is that, let me put it this way. The Arjun drives better. Okay, it has a far superior suspension. So I would say generation apart. It fires better. It's far more accurate. In terms of accuracy requirements, it is again a generation ahead. In maintainability, it is a generation ahead. In sustainability, it is a generation ahead. You can take out Arjun power pack. You can pull it out in less than 20 minutes, hook it up, check it, repair it, maintain it, and put it back, in all that in less than 2 hours or 3 hours. I mean, if you start doing that on a T72 or T90, it's a 2-day affair. So we are not talking of the same generation of vehicles. The design of a T72 T90 is very good, but it was designed in a particular era and it was designed for Russian requirements. Russia typically does not use its forces in active combat for over 72 hours to maximum 96 hours. They pull them back for R&R and pump in new formations which are reserved. We don't have that facility. I mean, my regiment started 71 war on day one and it finished on the last day. I mean, there is no question of after 96 hours or after 72 hours rotating the regiment back and pushing in a fashion. We just don't have resources of that type, and the tempo of operations is very high. So our requirements are different, and the Russians do not over-engineer their vehicles. Their engines will not last as much as an MTU or as designed for. Their transmissions will not last as long. Their tracks will not last as long because they don't expect the tank to last very long. T-34 was, if you post World War II when studies were carried out, they found that the transmission of a Panther was designed to last 50,000 kilometers, whereas the T-34's transmission was supposed to last for 15 or 20,000 kilometers max, because the Russians did not expect the tank to survive the battlefield much beyond that. And if it fails, then they'll just replace it. So the philosophies were different. I'm not saying one was right and the other was wrong. Their way of fighting war was different. And what tipped the scales was the capacity and the cost of production, the cost of war. That tipped the scales in favor of the Russians. So when we design our own vehicles, these have to be structured around our requirements, our capabilities, and the capacities of generating the numbers that we need. And as very rightly said, I mean, 120 and 130s, these are no numbers that should be placed, because neither does it leave the project this way nor that way. Neither have you dumped it nor have you supported it. So that is not how that. I mean, as I said at the very beginning, that Arjun is a good example of how a project ought not to be done. But there is still time to course correct, and there is nothing wrong with this tank. It fires better, it drives better, it's got a better power pack. It's the armor protection. There is no comparison. Its ammunition and all is better protected. In fact, now in the Mark 1A or something, I believe there are blowout panels also which have been incorporated. Ammunition storage has been changed. Whereas ammunition storage in the T-72, T-90 series has proven in the Ukraine war, also in Chechnya conflict, also it was very amply highlighted. That is a very critical drawback, and countries would be concerned. And because a hit of that nature, the crew survivability is pretty close to zero. I mean, the explosion is almost instantaneous. So crew survivability over here is very important, and therefore, when the way I see it personally is, General Hanup Singh was a visionary, and he would not have sort of created QRs which were not time tested, which were not which were not something that he was not in agreement with. I remember attending at least 2 seminars in Chennai with him on the Arjun, and how thinking. I mean, there was one army sort of a team which suggested that now that the Germans have made the 120 millimeter smooth bow, we should also switch the Arjun to 120 millimeter smoothbore. So that's when the senior scientist got it. And he said, we should not be saying that do this and do that. Tell us what capabilities do you need. Talk to us in terms of penetration. Talk to us in terms of types of ammunitions. Talk in terms of the effects that you want on the target. And then we will try and develop that system that meets your requirements. Whether it should be rifled or smooth, or when we already have rifle technology, we are making rifle barrels. When you already have a bird in hand, why do you want to go somewhere for looking out for another bird which is in the bush and you may not be not likely to catch hold of it, right? So these are sort of we operate in very compartmentalized, manner, and unless we are able to put our I come back to Markava. It was headed by General Tal. He had a whole team of people with him from the scientific community, from military community, and he held on. He held on as the head of the project till he saw the project to its fruition, till it got launched. Now that is the approach which needs to be taken. Either he and if they would have found that he's not making headway, they would have sacked him and they would put some other person as the head of the project. But it was a project which they said that we must push through, and they pushed through. So that is the approach we also need to take. I remember meeting in one of these two meetings that I attended, meeting up with the senior scientist of DRDO, very young gentleman. He'd come back from US. He was working for some big company over there in armor development. And when DRDO reached out and we are developing our own tank, would you like to come and help us? He came back. I mean, he must have taken a huge drop in his salaries and all that. But he developed the Kanchanama. He was a key man in the development of the Kanchanama, one of the few countries which has that capability today in the world. So, armor protection, this tank is designed to give its crew a fighting chance. It will keep the crew, it will give them a fighting chance. It has the ability, because on our Indian, across the international border with Pakistan and all that, there are no big maneuvers taking place. I mean, where the space, these are, survivability will be a key thing. The Israelis also identified that survivability is very key as far as their military is concerned. So you have the Markava and various other heavy APCs that they are now fielding. So the operational doctrine dictates design, not the other way. So, and you can't expect another person, an outsider, to tell you what your design should be or what your operational doctrine should be, and therefore this design should be this. The Korean tank is designed for the Koreans. It's going to fight the South Koreans. Are you going to use it against the North Koreans? But to say that it will meet the Indian requirement, it may not be entirely true. And we have those capabilities. I mean, we are now, you got this K9 Thunder. We had the Bhim. How was it not as good, or how would it not have evolved into an as good weapon system?
Which leads to the question as to what exactly does the army do when it comes to force planning, or let's say a structure of your future force? What equipment or capabilities does the army require, again, like I said, in 5, 10, 15 years point of time? Because we had attempts with the Tank X and the Beam, as well as a light tank that we used to operate. I'm sure you have experience with those Stewarts, I think, right? So when you've operated a particular type and then its life ends, and then you do not see a program for a replacement or something that can do the same role in a better manner, whatever form it might take. So how does the thinking happen within the army? Because we are obviously civilians and we are not privy to how the army thinks at a higher level, the ideating level, so to speak. If you could you know, help us through that?
There is a weapons and equipment planning directorate, and this is their job. Why the army didn't go in for a light tank? That is a good question, and I also asked the same question. But and the Chinaman, as I always say, he's a tough teacher. He teaches you lessons, but in a tough way. And so when what their light tank, what's it known as?
ZTQ
ZT15?
15.
Yeah,
ZT15.
yeah,
ZTQ 15.
yeah.
Yeah.
That so when that was launched, that sent us stampeding into developing now, right? Whereas we had light tank, the PT-76s and all that, and we operated them very successfully. Uh, DRDO had their own light tank program on a BMP-3 at some point in time. But I suppose somebody let the ball slip. And the Chinese, if we had been alert, we would have noticed that in 1962 war, they used light tanks in Ladakh sector. So the Gurkhas positions were attacked by light tanks, infantry assisted by supported by light tanks, Chinese light tanks. So that would have put us on the alert, and seeing the terrain and all that. By now, we should have had our own light tanks into service in numbers, which are operationally viable, uh, rather than getting stampeded. We need to. All I can say is we need to be very clear as far as our operational vision is concerned, our doctrine is concerned. Uh, Operational vision will lays down as to how your operations will unfold, and so how should you equip yourself to in keeping with that vision. Now that should be, in my view, the way to approach this. And all this needs, it's not a just an army thing. It's a services thing, and not only a services thing. It's a national thing. It's a national level thing. It has to be discussed and debated at that level, and then certain decisions have to be taken, and everybody is bound by those decisions till such times major changes happen, which force those decisions to be amended with the passage of time. That
Absolutely.
is the right way to do it, this drifting that I see is often because is because we certainly lack this body. And a major thing that the Army and the Air Force also lack is the in-house research and development capability. Something which the Navy inherited from the British in having the ship constructors cadre. The Army and the Air Force don't have that. And resultantly, technologies get sort of don't get that much of importance, or the way the Navy is able to sort of incorporate emerging technologies. I think they're doing a better job at it. I mean, it's proven. You have a nuclear submarine and you have an aircraft carrier. What more do you want?
Yeah.
So see, the whole issue and the Arjun MBT is of course a polarizing topic, but I'll just throw a few things out there which are facts. That the fact was, for the longest time it was said that the Arjun Mark I's rifled gun could not fire an ATGM, right? And that was proven to be otherwise. And both with a foreign system, the Lahat, and also with a domestically developed system called the CLGM, developed by ARD. So that was not correct. Secondly, it was always going to be the case that something with the variable spring hydropneumatic suspension unit, right, and was going to perform better, especially one with integral damping, was going to perform better than a torsion bar suspension. That was always going to be the case. Yet people kept on doubting the Arjun's mobility. Then, when it was pointed out that the system had lower ground pressure than its Russian, sort of competition, and it had this far advanced sort of running gear and, of course, suspension, then the whole topic was the whole issue was shifted to strategic mobility, that the tank could not be deployed wherever we wanted it, etc., and all that. So the thing is that goals are invariably shifted. Goalposts are invariably shifted when we talk about indigenous development in India, and people start speaking double Dutch after a point to run down indigenous development. They just keep raising newer and newer issues, so most of which are red herrings, really. So this sort of thing requires, again, we come back to the same point that Brigadier Rathore has emphasized throughout the program. There has to be an apex level decision making body that is invariant to the vicissitudes of politics, right? Whether it be interdepartmental politics, interministerial politics, or even interparty politics, right? This is what needs to be done. And why this is required in a democracy like us? Simple. We are faced, again, going back to what Brigadier Rathore said, we are faced by two enemies in being, probably a third set of
In the
people
making.
causing internal disturbances also, although we have sort of cracked down quite hard on them in recent times. But we definitely, and one of those, one is a bit of a mirror image, used to be a mirror image of ours. So, and in fact was even worse than us. It depended entirely on the largest of its geopolitical benefactors after a while. Today 81% of its imports are from China directly. But the other one is a very serious country, a serious communist, ruthless communist country, which does not believe that profit justifies every motive, etc., or something of that sort, but believes that power ultimately flows through the barrel of a gun, and also believes that the gun has to be manufactured indigenously, domestically, developed domestically. That is the kind of opponent we are faced with. So this is something that should not be lost on us in general, as a people, as a society, as a polity. This is where the problem really stems from, our own basic fundamental thinking, our tendency to hang on to other people's coattails and look for quick fix solutions. Till we move out of that mode, nothing will happen. We talked about program management and the fact that you need to see people from the beginning to the end sometimes. So then perhaps you need to take a chance with slightly younger individuals, maybe people who are in their 40s, to run important projects, because they'll be there while the project sort of reaches fruition.
Yeah.
Rather than, even if you don't want to make them the nominal head of the project, make them the second in command of the project, running basically doing most of the running around for the project and pulling together different entities. This can be always be done. This has been done in other countries before, especially the major powers, right? I'll give you an example. The projects that led to the U2 spy plane, was called Project Aquatone, and then what led to the SR7 A12, SR71, Project Oxcart, they were all run by a person called Richard Bissell Jr., right? Who was part of the CIA, and who was initially not the head of one of those projects, but he was the second in command, and he became that. So there is much to be said, and much to be done, and much that can be done even within a democratic framework to achieve the kind of system that Brigadier Rathore has so eloquently elaborated upon. Right, that is something that we cannot now sort of push into the future. Okay, before we sort of end this program, let us take at least one question which will be addressed to Brigadier Rathore. And so we have Akshay Iyer asking, as I think, let me just circle to that question. Please bear
Yeah.
with me.
Is the 60 ton plus category heavy MBT going to become obsolete? I think we've touched upon this, but yeah.
No, the MBT will not go obsolete. We should not get overly sort of affected by the drones which we are now seeing, and so people are calling out, and the sort of videos, the social media is full of these drones attacking tanks and etc. etc. I'm sure the Hamas also would have used drones against the Merkavas, but I don't see any Merkavas burning. There, with time and application of mind, defensive layers will emerge, whether they be electronic warfare based or other systems, direct attack systems. They will emerge to sort of provide protection. Just as in earlier days, you had layered air defense. You had short range, medium range, long range, and under this umbrella of air defense, your ground forces used to operate, right? But now that the threat is from these drones of various types, whether direct attack or surveillance or whatever, again, a similar sort of a layered defensive systems will emerge. all components of warfare are a part of a larger system. And so a larger system will have to be put together. And that is how this will happen. So there is no heavy MBT there is only an MBT, and it can range from 40 tons to 60 tons. And you have light tanks and medium tanks. I mean, MBT, main battle tanks. The 60-ton figure is being touched because of the protection requirements against direct firing weapons, particularly. And if you see our FRCV, RFP also, it's 55 plus minus 10%. They are bound to cross that 10%, firstly. And that is not including the protection, the protective explosive armor and Mira armor and all that. So with that, weight will further go up. So willy-nilly, this weight is going to be somewhere where the Arjun is presently weighing. So what this hullabaloo was about it's being too heavy and all that, I don't understand. And on this transportation thing, I am reminded of a British story. Britain failed to design any good tank throughout World War II till they designed the Centurion towards the fag end of World War II. You know the reason? Because British tank design was supposed to factor into the transportation gauge of the British flat cars. So he could not exceed that width. And so therefore he could not design a tank which was in a heavier category. Only with the Centurion they did away with these restrictions. So most of these restrictions are in the mind. And once you do away with these restrictions, and to say you're creating a tank for fighting on the battlefield and you say, can I lift it in a C-130 or a C-17? How often do you lift a tank in a C-17? And so therefore you do down an entire project because of that.
We don't have enough of those in the first place, sir.
Anyway,
so that was a good question, young man. The MBT will remain and it will remain relevant, and it will remain relevant with current technologies, which we will keep incorporating into them.
Anyway, we've really overshot our time limit today because it's supposed to be indigenization appreciation hour and not ours. But you can never have enough of Brigadier Rathore, and I'm sure he will sort of come back to this podcast sooner than later. And
we have a lot of questions to ask about what you've seen during your service and stories from there. So we definitely want you back.
And stories of Lieutenant General Hanut Singh as well. So those are things that we
podcast on him.
Yeah, we will. We certainly will. And but now we have to call it a night. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay focused. Stay in support of indigenization. And Jai Hind, as always.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure interacting with you.
Same here, sir. Thank you for sparing your time for us. Thank you. Bye-bye.